I knew that 28 years later, Bone Temple was going to be loud and aggressive in a zombified way, but I didn't know that 28 years later, Bone Temple was going to be loud and aggressive in an Iron Maiden way. What? This movie is metal as
Are you ready?
28 years later, after the rage virus has wreaked havoc on the world, Spike is now inducted into Jimmy Crystal's gang on the mainland, and Dr. Kelson makes a discovery that could alter the world. 28 years later, The Bone Temple is directed by Nia DaCosta and written by Alex Garland, who also wrote 28 Days Later and 28 Years Later. And guys, when I found out that this movie was shot back-to-back with the previous movie, 28 Years Later, which just came out last June, I really thought that this movie was going to be poorly planned and weakly structured. If you know me or you've seen any of my coverage on the 28 blank later, I guess I've only covered 28 years, but I've talked about my thoughts on the series. You'll know that I am not a huge fan of this one. And I dislike 28 Years Later pretty wholeheartedly. So that being said, I obviously was not very excited for this movie. The only thing I think I was really intrigued by was the Jimmies. First of all, because I love Jack O'Connell, but second of all, how could you not at the very least, be a little bit intrigued by this motley crew we were given as an absurd ending to the 28 Years Later film? But unlike some of the other movies in this franchise, I feel like this one specifically fits my movie taste a little bit more snugly. Probably because it's apocalyptically metal, my friends. Let's get into it. Starting out with one of the biggest positive I have for this movie, I love the Jimmies. Not only were they funny, quirky, yet absolutely brutal, I think that they represent more than just this preposterous cult. In a world already defined by the infected, I think that the Jimmies escalate the horror by showing what humans choose to become when survival is no longer the only goal. The Jimmies are particularly interesting to me because as survivors in a world collapsed after nearly 3 decades, they aren't just traumatized, but they're kind of exhausted by moral choice, and being a Jimmy offers certainty, belonging, and permission to be cruel. It's almost their duty to be cruel. How they look is almost cartoonish, and I think that it contrasts well in a compelling way with the world around them in absolute decay. The outfits and the wigs feel so out of time, neither modern nor ancient, which definitely reinforces the idea that the world is dead and irrelevant. So while the Jimmies come across as absolutely outlandish, they represent the bigger picture of how survival instincts can mutate into sadistic tradition and humanity turned upside down. And this is exactly what I'd want to see in an apocalyptic movie 28 years later, so I'm glad that we got this in this film. And when we talk about the Jimmies, we have to talk about the gore, because in this film, they are synonymous. In general, I think that the gore is brilliantly done in this movie because it has narrative purpose. For the Jimmies, the gore isn't really there to show how dangerous the world is, it's more so there to show how violence has become culture, which makes it feel more meaningful and sickening. Juxtapose the Jimmies with the infected here, and we get an interesting difference of intentionality. The gritty, raw cannibalism played out by the infected is more or less natural and part of the world that they are living in, while the brutality of the Jimmies is deliberate and almost ceremonial. Not only does the gore in this film look good, but it serves a purpose, and that's why I think it's a strong point in the film. Another strong point in the film is Dr. Kelson and his patient, purposeful search for a cure. In the previous film, I had hoped for at least a small subplot showing progress toward a cure. After all, what else are you going to do 28 years later in an infected world? Get a job? No. I love Dr. Kelson in this one, and how he methodically works side by side the Alpha to develop a cure and give the man another shot at life, whatever that may mean, 28 years later. I expected the Kelson-Alpha relationship to fall into the typical cliche of good intentions leading to disaster, but instead, the connection felt more cathartic and genuine. Kelson's resilience, shown through his small victories, really felt monumental in a hopeless place. People, we found love in a hopeless place. I also really like that this story is less character-driven and more focused on how the world transforms when left to cults, rituals, and self-sustaining ecosystems. I'm glad that Spike doesn't take the spotlight like he did in the previous film. Instead, his character shows what happens once people like him no longer shape history. The movie is brilliant in that it's more interested in what replaces meaning once survival is no longer enough. And let's talk about that Bone Temple, because in 28 years later, the temple really is almost its own character. The structure is first and foremost stunning and impressive, but it also fuses environment, ideology, and horror, which shapes the film's mood. The scenes inside of it enhance the tone of hopelessness and obsession with a design that feels both organic and ritualistic. And while we're on the topic of the Bone Temple, it's time to talk about my favorite positive of the movie. The mother dancing. What are you talking about, Lindsay, you may ask? There's some very strange and funny dancing happening in the Bone Temple, and while it comes out of absolutely nowhere, I found it genuinely inspired. To me, it's one of the clearest ways the film shows how culture mutates after the apocalypse. Dance becomes a language for belief, power, and memory. It's powerful because movement itself turns into identity in a world stripped of art and institutions. The Teletubby dance, first of all, is absurd, a true what the f moment. But the more you sit with it, the more it feels like a representation of corrupted innocence, which makes the scene oddly dismal, but perfectly in tune with the film's overall mood. On the other hand, Kelson's Iron Maiden dance, metal. Metal is The second I saw that Iron Maiden record, I knew we were in for a Number of the Beast dancing masterclass, and I was right. I fucking loved it. I mean, I am biased because I am a metal fan, but still, Dr. Kelson, you are metal as f. I salute you. It really is f***ing weird, but I so dig it. And finally, for my last positive, we have to briefly touch on the ending. I won't say much about it other than the fact that I love how it functions as a bridge back to the first film in the franchise. And more importantly, it highlights the way humanity's remnants endure, adapt, and fail, all while the virus and its cultural consequences march on regardless of individual survival. And yes, my friends, it clearly does set us up for more 28 blank later installments in the future. Do we need more? I don't know, but if we continue spitting out more similar to this one, I think maybe yes. Moving on to some negatives, I did feel like there were a couple moments where the realism pulled me out a bit. For instance, there's one kill, I'll call it the hook kill. While this kill was shocking and super cool, it felt very exaggerated. Cleanly going straight through a skull in one smooth motion, I think would take an absurd amount of force and, of course, luck. And as much as I love the idea of Kelson playing records, I didn't think it fully added up. I get the symbolism, but for someone like me who values consistency, these moments did stand out to me. Moving on to another moment that I would have changed here, there is this pregnant woman who only appears briefly in the film, and I found her immediately intriguing. Her story ends pretty abruptly, with her still uninfected and having lost everyone, running alone into a forest full of the infected. And at first I wanted more from her, but within the context of the story, it does make sense to leave it there. That said, I really hope she does show up in future films, because even in her short screen time, I thought she was a compelling character. I also left the film with a few questions and some development that I wish we would have seen more of, especially regarding the Alpha. For starters, how does one even become the Alpha? Is it just the biggest and the strongest? How does the Alpha's absence affect the infected? And how are they all connected? I'd love to know more about this so-called degraded ecosystem. So if these questions were a little bit more clearly answered for me, I think I would have left the slightest bit more satisfied. And for my final negative, if you can call it that, if you guys know me, you know I'm not a huge fan of this series. I'm just not a big fan of zombie movies in general. So yeah, I don't think I'd watch this movie again just for kicks, but honestly, they did a lot of things really good here. And let's be real, this edition of Kelson singing the Number of the Beast really does bring back any point that I would take away anyways. So in general, do I like zombie movies? Not really. And for pure entertainment value, it wasn't top notch for me, but like I said, really, really great stuff happening in this movie, and that is a bit of a nitpick. Overall, guys, I was impressed by this movie, mostly because I wasn't expecting much, but also because I think that they did a lot of good here, like I've been saying. The movie is gloriously weird and brutal in all the right ways. The Jimmies are terrifyingly quirky, the gore is satisfying, and Kelson somehow fabulously rocks out to Iron Maiden. The Bone Temple itself is quite impressive, and the dancing, well, you'll just have to see it to believe it. Were there a few things I'd change? Absolutely. But nothing major and nothing that harshly dampens the experience. I'm giving this a 4 out of 5. Because even as someone who's not a huge zombie movie fan or even a fan of this series, I left impressed, horrified, and weirdly entertained. But let's see what the general consensus is. 93% Rotten Tomatoes, 92% of Google users liked this movie. Yeah, guys, I love when I'm on par with the general consensus. Well, I like when I'm not either. Gotta be a little controversial every once in a while, but I think they did great here. And the thing is, for me, it was so shocking because I expected nothing, especially with being shot back to back with the previous film, which I didn't like really at all. I'd say if you guys are a fan of the series, you'll probably love this one, but honestly, I'm not a fan of the series, and I really enjoyed it. That said, the overall mood and tone do feel consistent with the other films, in my opinion. Regardless, there is this level of ridiculousness here that absolutely deserves to be seen on the big screen. After all, where else are you gonna witness post-apocalyptic horror, cult gore, and Iron Maiden headbanging in a goddamn bone temple? Come on now. That's the kind of metal you don't just listen to, you survive it. But those are my thoughts. What do you guys think? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you agree? Do you disagree? What do you guys think of 28 years later, The Bone Temple? Let me know, and thank you guys for watching, and catch me next time. Peace.